1. Why I can't put wrestling posters on my walls anymore. I love listening to music just as much, if not much more, than that next guy. Sure, who doesn't? But for me, the real sweetest music is the sound of body slams on canvas, sweet chin music, and the sound of Honky Tonk Man's guitar getting smashed over a human head. That's right, I like wrestling. However, there was one strange sound I kept hearing for about a month when I was a child, and it almost made me give up on loving wrestling entirely. Here's what happened, but you should probably not read any further if you have even just one poster hanging up in your room. First, I need to paint a picture of my childhood bedroom, for that is the place where the eerie sound was heard. The walls of my room were basically wallpapered with full-sized posters of every oiled-up beefcake in the wild world of wrestling. Next to my bed there was a poster of the Nature Boy himself, Ric Flair. The poster said, "The Beauty of Nature," and was a photograph of Ric Flair sitting in a barber's chair, getting his hair done by 3 beautiful ladies as he read a wrestling magazine with, of course, himself featured on the cover. It was the last thing I looked at before going to sleep, and the first thing I saw upon awakening from my sleep. I remember asking my dad what a Nature Boy was, because I basically wanted to be Ric Flair and needed some tips on how to be like my idol. He did this weird thing with his arms like he was dribbling 2 basketballs at the same time and just said, "Stylin' and profilin', stylin' and profilin'," over and over until I got embarrassed and went to my room. My plan as an 8-year-old was just to grow my hair out, dye it blonde, buy and wear a wristwatch, and maybe wear some feathers or something. I never did do any of that, however, and after the events I am about to recount, well, let's just say that I'll be fine if my walls are completely bare these days. It all started one night when I was in my room reading a wrestling magazine while playing wrestling tapes that I taped off the TV. I was the only kid in my neighborhood who asked for a personal VCR instead of a Nintendo for Christmas because I couldn't handle just watching wrestling once or twice a week. I just couldn't do it. So I'm sitting there reading a wrestling magazine next to my poster of Ric Flair, who, if you remember, was also reading a wrestling magazine in the poster, and just kind of vegging out and learning stats and fun facts about obscure Japanese wrestlers. That's when I heard the sound. It was like a distant woo kind of sound every 10 seconds or so. I thought it was coming from the TV at first, like maybe it was someone in the audience making a really loud but distant exclamation or something, so I muted the sound. A few seconds crept by in silence, and then woo! It was kind of faint, but it was clearly coming from my room somewhere. I moved everything out from under my bed and closet, and the whole time I kept hearing this weird woo noise very faintly. That's when I laid on my bed and closed my eyes very tightly and just listened. Woo! That's when I actually confirmed that the sound was definitely coming from my Ric Flair poster. I ran to my dad right away. Not to sidetrack the main story, but sometimes when I replay the events of this terrifying month in my mind, I always remember the first time I told my dad about the noise, and as I turned the corner of the living room, he was just standing in the middle of our TV room doing that weird thing where he was pretending to dribble 2 basketballs really fast, but he stopped as soon as I came in and pretended he wasn't doing anything weird, but was just going over to turn the TV on even though the remote control was over on the couch. I told him my Ric Flair poster was making a woo sound, and he was just like, "Oh yeah, Ric Flair says woo," and then just laughed about it like I was just being a goofball kid or something. I moved my bed to the other side of my bedroom near the TV so I didn't have to sleep next to that weird wooing poster of Ric Flair. I kept the TV on all through the night, but I could still hear the wooing no matter how many pillows I piled on my head. I had the same nightmare for like 3 weeks where my Ric Flair poster came to life and the girls tried to pull me into the poster like in Nelson's music video for After the Rain, and my dad was sitting in the chair instead of Ric Flair, and he was actually dribbling 2 basketballs while sitting, and he kept saying, "Love that Joker," which was a line from the Batman movie that was my favorite movie that year, but after this experience I actually couldn't watch it again until the winter of 1998. During this time of weird wooing and nightmares, I lost a lot of sleep. I fell asleep during lunchtime when chewing on Gushers fruit snacks, and they thought I was drooling blood or something because they made me go to the nurse's office, and then I had to go to the counselor's office once they determined that I had just fallen asleep while eating red and purple Gushers fruit snacks. The counselor at my school, Mr. Merkus, was like, "What is wrong with you? Why do you look like a zombie? Is everything okay at home?" Unlike my dad, Mr. Merkus listened to what I had to say about my poster talking and seemed very concerned. We argued for a while because he kept saying I was hearing like normal house noises and sometimes people thought they were ghosts. And I was like, my Ric Flair poster is saying "woo," which is Ric Flair's catchphrase, so I don't think it's a coincidence. I guess Mr. Merkus called my dad and they made a plan to meet at my house after school. The plan was to show me that my poster was not talking or determine that I was hearing things. I'm not really sure because nobody could anticipate what actually happened next. The three of us went into my bedroom and I pointed to the poster. Mr. Merkus was in the middle of saying, "See, there's nothing here but," when he was suddenly interrupted by a soft and long woo that made everyone in the room freeze. "Maybe it's an animal in the crawl space," my dad said, and grabbed the top corners of the poster and started to peel them down. The smell hit us first. It must have been mostly contained by the poster, which I had affixed to the wall with a ton of putty. Little did I know I had made a smell-proof chamber. As the poster fell away, a massive hole in my wall was revealed. Both my dad and Mr. Merkus gasped and coughed while I just screamed my head off. Inside my wall, directly behind the Ric Flair poster, was the corpse of a man. His limbs were entangled in the wooden beams that were inside the wall. His neck was twisted back so it was hard to see his face, but the last thing I noticed before my dad picked me up and ran out of the room was that the man in my wall had long bleach blonde hair, just like a certain someone who I idolized. I didn't find out the details until I was much older, but apparently the coroner said that the wooing sounds I had been hearing were gases escaping the dead body. Apparently this phenomenon can continue for months after a body expires given the right conditions. I guess I was lucky we found him when we did. You may think that covering your walls with posters is a cheap and colorful way to decorate your walls in your home, but I wouldn't recommend it. Who knows what could be happening right behind them. 2. Does anyone remember the jobber wrestler called Stephen Violence? For as long as I can even remember, I have always been a fan of that most entertaining of sports, which is called professional wrestling. When I was a kid, wrestling ruled everything around me, so when Christmas time or birthday time rolled around each and every December or October, I would ask for wrestling action figures, a poster, t-shirts, trading cards, and of course VHS tapes so I could watch professional wrestling whenever I wanted to, which was all the time, of course. I had accumulated almost every VHS tape that was officially released by both the WCW and the WWF, so when my dad stuffed my stocking with some unmarked underground bootleg wrestling tapes featuring wrestlers from the minor leagues, I could barely contain the happiness that I felt at that moment and drop-kicked a tape into the VCR immediately. Of course, at the time I had no idea that one of the matches on those tapes would introduce me to the most bizarre wrestler I had ever seen in my life, one that I would be talking about for the rest of my life, with both wrestling fans and just regular people as well. I was about to be introduced to the mystery that was about to haunt me for a lifetime, the jobber wrestler known as Stephen Violence. For those of you who don't know, a jobber is a professional wrestling term for the guys who were just there to lose to a wrestler who was actually well known. Usually these guys didn't have a funny name or a gimmick, they were just guys. Sometimes they were not even in good shape. They could have been your dad or even your uncle. It was like when Batman fights a group of generic street thugs. You just know how the fight is going to go down, so you don't need to bite your nails and worry about Batman, because Batman's going to be just fine. Imagine if your goofbag uncle tried to fight Batman, and yeah, I think you get the right idea. Jobbers were basically wrestling cannon fodder. So about halfway through the tape, it switches from some local WCW events to a very dark and kind of blurry venue with a pretty big crowd for the time. A few matches into this, and this weird-looking guy comes out from behind the curtains. The jobbers usually start in the ring because they don't have any theme music and nobody really knows or cares who they are, so it would be weird to bring out a total nobody to musical fanfare. But that is what happened on this weird, unmarked VHS tape, and that is how I was introduced to Stephen Violence. At first, there's just a shot of an empty ring, and then a little box pops up that says Stephen Violence, and the announcer says something in French. Then the music starts, and it is really loud even for entrance music. You may have seen wrestlers make an entrance to aggressive nu metal, or even rap or classical at times, but not Stephen Violence. This absolute maniac comes out to Sheena Easton's 1981 classic pop hit, Morning Train 9 to 5. Don't get me wrong, this is a really fun and dancey song, and it even has a nice message about how the singer's boyfriend, or maybe husband, works at an office all day so that he can provide them with the good life. However, we are talking about wrestling here. This song will not intimidate your opponent or make you look tough or cool or in control. Stephen Violence comes out dancing hard to this song, really giving it everything he's got. He's kind of snapping to the rhythm with one hand like he's in a West Side Story gang or something, and carrying a briefcase with the other hand. From the waist up, he's all business, buttoned up white shirt, necktie, and a crisp black blazer. Below the waist, he's all wrestler, wearing the standard wrestling Speedo and laced up wrestling boots. Again, jobbers don't usually have gimmicks, so the fact that he was such an elaborate character who was some kind of hard-working husband seemed kind of baffling, to say the least. It takes him a really long time to get to the ring, too, because of how he's dancing so enthusiastically. Even as a kid, I thought that maybe he had too much enthusiasm. I couldn't tell what the announcers were saying because I don't speak French, but they were laughing nervously at times. Meanwhile, Stephen Violence has approached the ringside, but before he gets into the ring, he leans over into the crowd and takes a big old bite out of some little kid's foot-long frankfurter, and the kid actually starts to cry. Everyone in the audience starts to boo him at this point, but he just does this weird little victory dance like he's just scored a winning touchdown in a Major League football game, and the whole time he's open-mouthed chewing too much hot dog and swishing his hips to Sheena Easton. The whole thing made me very uncomfortable. The music changes quite suddenly to the French national anthem, and out comes a real wrestler, Mr. Dino Bravo himself. This was before Dino bleached his hair blonde, to give the real wrestling fans out there a sense of the timeline. Dino marches out and he's shaking his head like, "Get a load of this guy. I can't even believe my eyes. Hey, what is this, a joke?" But he gets into the ring anyway while Stephen Violence is still laughing and chewing. That is, he was laughing and chewing until Dino Bravo unleashed a savage blow to the breadbasket that made him cough up all the chewed-up hot dog right in the center of the ring. Then they just stared at each other in disbelief for a long time. Not so much a showdown stare, but more like a wide-eyed stare, like they actually couldn't believe this was happening. The referee slides out and reaches under the ring for a big janitor's push broom and gets back in the ring to clean it up, but Dino Bravo is obviously pissed, so he grabs the broom out of the ref's little hands and throws it at Stephen Violence, who catches it and then starts shaking his head violently like he's about to be tortured by having to clean up his vomited-up stolen hot dog or something. He gets this sad look on his face and gives the push broom one strong push into the hot dog pile, and the broom part falls off, which causes the audience to lose it and start cheering, presumably for the fact that now the task of cleaning the ring will be more difficult for this pathetic man. Suddenly, Stephen Violence starts swinging the handle of the broom around his head like he's doing martial arts or something. The ref and Dino Bravo are exchanging a look with each other and shrug their shoulders, and then the ref takes one step towards Stephen Violence and gets knocked into next week by a broom handle swinging into his face. I know there is a lot of speculation about the realism of pro wrestling, but regardless of which side of that debate you land on, this act of push broom violence was very real. There is blood pouring out of the ref's nose, and Dino Bravo is on the mat trying to revive the poor guy. That's when Stephen Violence just bolts out of the ring and into the audience. They're all booing him as he runs past, but nobody tries to stop him. It's a weird situation, and I'm not sure how I would react. It all happened so suddenly. The weirdest part is right at the end, as the video is fading to black. You can distinctly hear Dino Bravo shouting to someone outside the ring, "That wasn't him. That was not Stephen Violence." I watched this video many times as a kid. It was a staple at my sleepovers for many years. I've been talking about and asking people I meet about Stephen Violence, but nobody remembers him, and there is nothing on the internet either. About 15 years ago, I went to get some old stuff from my parents' house, only to be informed that our climate is particularly bad for VHS tapes, and when my mom saw the shocking amount of white mold growing on my wrestling tapes, she had to throw them away. Sometimes when I'm just out living my life and I see a man who looks about 30 years older than me, I squint and try to imagine him young and wearing half a suit and chewing a hot dog while dancing and just having the time of his life dancing to Sheena Easton, and then I shake my head and have to laugh. Are you out there, Stephen Violence? 3. WWF Magazine won't let me cancel my subscription. Nowadays, kids don't care about magazines, which I know for sure because I actually asked some kids before I started writing this. One of my nephews was convinced I was talking about newspapers, and I had to explain 3 times that they were small and usually in color and they came out once a month. It was really frustrating because I think I was boring my nephews to tears by talking about magazines too much. They just wanted to watch videos of another kid watching videos on a phone. Then I showed them some of the mail I had been continuously receiving for the last 30 years, and their eyes grew wide with fright. They said it was like one of the creep tales shared on the internet, and that people often shared their creep tales with others and then received advice. Well, this is basically the story about how I have been harassed for scamming my way into a WWF magazine subscription back in 1992, and it haunts me to this day. For some reason, my mom didn't want to pay $23 just so I could get a wrestling magazine every month for an entire year, even though it was a great value when compared to the cover price. She was like, "You have a library card," even though I told her I couldn't cut out pictures from library magazines and cover my bedroom walls with them, could I? Also, the magazines at the library used to suck. Anyways, I was really mad at her, and shortly around that time we were also dealing with the death of my grandfather, so when we were organizing things at his house, I hate to admit this, but I stole one of the checks from his checkbook. I filled it out for $23 and sent it in for an annual subscription to WWF Magazine. The perfect crime. Even though I'm sure I didn't know how to properly fill out a check, I started receiving issues in a few weeks. That's right, in the fall of 1991, I would hang around the mailbox after school to intercept issues of WWF Magazine that were addressed to my dead grandfather, Frederick T. Mulberry, which was a little spooky but also a little sad. I had just received the October issue of WWF Magazine a few days before, so I wasn't watching the mailbox too carefully. Then my mom comes barging into my room while I'm gazing upon the glossy full-color photos in the very magazine I was trying to keep a secret from her, and said, "Care to explain why your dead grandfather is receiving mail from the World Wrestling Federation?" I tried to lie about it and say he bought the subscription for me as a gift, and that made her really mad because my grandfather had dementia for the last couple years of his life and was not in charge of his finances, apparently. She angrily tore open the letter and read it out loud while I felt the shame of betraying and stealing from my poor grandfather. This is what it said. This letter is for official Hulkamaniac Frederick T. Mulberry. We always appreciate when someone is not a complete numbskull and knows the best of the best in full-color wrestling magazine entertainment and makes the right choice by subscribing to WWF Magazine, brother. Unfortunately, your check bounced higher than a 90-pound wimp getting thrown from the top turnbuckle. Please contact us as soon as possible so we can put this little financial problem in a submission hold and return to getting you the finest glossy gossip you deserve as a true fan of the ultimate in sports entertainment. My mom was upset and confused. She said something like, "Your grandfather fought in World War II. I don't think he'd appreciate being called a hulking maniac. That's very disrespectful." And I started to try to explain to the best of my ability what a Hulkamaniac was and how it definitely had patriotic connotations and that it wasn't a bad word, when she told me to just stop babbling and confess what I had done. When I told her about stealing the check, she was visibly disgusted that I was so desperate for wrestling magazines. She said I had to do work around the house for $1 an hour until I had $23, and then I was going to put the cash in an envelope and mail it to the World Wrestling Federation with an apology note. I started doing all of the household chores and even had to work for my old neighbors, slowly accumulating $1 at a time. Unfortunately, the 7-Eleven behind my house had recently installed a WrestleFest arcade machine, so I wound up spending most of the money that I owed the WWF on playing WrestleFest. I think in my kid brain I thought that the WWF had made the arcade game, and so my money was basically going to them anyway, but deep down I knew I was being fiscally irresponsible. Then, the second letter arrived in the mail while I was raking leaves for Dr. Rebecca Tinas across the street. I opened it right then and there at the mailbox. Thank goodness for the pile of leaves, because I almost lost my balance and fell backwards into the pile of leaves when I read that letter. Here is what it said. "Oh, it looks like we have a serious problem, brother. Unfortunately for you, nothing gets by our processing department, and they can smell a bad check a mile away. Where a normal person writes the cash amount, you wrote WWF Magazine, brother. And instead of signing it, you just wrote Frederick T. Mulberry's name wrong in big block letters. Didn't your mommy ever tell you to not write checks that your checking account can't cash, brother? Well, it's time to pay the piper. Please send us the 23 American dollars so we can keep Johnny Lawman out of this little dispute, brother." I didn't know who Johnny Lawman was, but he sounded like maybe a sheriff-themed wrestler or something, and I was afraid I would go to jail for check theft and magazine fraud. I ran into my bedroom and checked my savings. There were only 2 quarters rattling around my bank, which was shaped like Hulk Hogan flexing. I put them into an envelope and wrote a really apologetic note explaining what happened and promising to send the rest of the money in the future. I never received any official letters from the WWF after that, but I continued to receive letters from someone regarding this problem for many years. The next letter had a hand-drawn WWF logo above the return address and was clearly hand-typed on old paper. It looked like a letter you would receive from a pen pal or something. However, while most letters that you get from pen pals are light and breezy, this letter was anything but. Here is what it said. "Hey brother, you know, we all have issues. For example, you have 3 issues of WWF Magazine that you didn't pay for. I, on the other hand, have 23 issues, and each and every one is an American dollar that you owe me. Oh, I'm sorry, you mailed me 2 quarters in the mail this week, so now you owe $22.50. Do you think this is funny? You think I like taking crap from the jabronis and processing? Do you really think I don't know when a check doesn't have an amount of money specified? I was really tired from my workout that morning, and you got lucky, punk. But your luck has run out, I'm afraid. If I don't get exactly 22 American dollars and 50 American cents, I'm going to make you regret the day you ever opened a magazine and gazed upon the pages without paying." This continued for 9 years. 9 years of some maniac harassing me, all for $22.50. 9 years of angry letters typed in all capital letters. I usually received about 1 letter a month. I wanted my mom to help, but she didn't read the letters and was just like, "This is what happens when you don't pay your debts." She thought I was learning a lesson or something, but really I was totally freaked. When I was 17, I got a job at Arby's, and with my first paycheck, I went to that same 7-Eleven I used to play WrestleFest at and got a money order for $22.50. I sent it to the P.O. box listed on the most recent letter. I noticed that the address had changed like 4 times in the last 9 years. I wrote a quick note about how I was sorry it took so long, but here was the money for the wrestling magazines, and I assumed that would be the end of the story. However, I received one final package in the mail. It was wrapped in greasy brown paper and for some reason addressed to my grandfather, Frederick Mulberry. Enclosed were the 9 issues of WWF magazine from 1992 that I had never received because I had never paid for them. The weird thing is that they were clearly heavily read through copies. Every single issue had a ton of old chocolate fingerprints all over the previously beautiful photos. It was gross, actually. I guess the lesson in all of this is don't write checks you stole from the dead. You never know who will try to cash them. 4. I found an old PS2 memory card in the trash. They always say that one man's trash is another man's treasure, and I have always found this to be true. I've been dumpster diving for years, and you really never know what you are going to find, which I think is part of the allure. One time I found not 1 but 4 World War I gas masks that were covered in sparkly sequins like they had been bedazzled or something. Another time I found a whole envelope of winning lotto tickets from the 90s that would have been worth over $10,000 if they weren't expired. My house, as you might imagine, is like if Pee-wee's Playhouse had a baby with a fancy museum. Literally every shelf and wall is covered with the fruits of my labor. Recently, I found something while dumpster diving that has turned my understanding of reality upside down, and I need to know if something like this has happened to anyone else. I was hitting many of my usual dumpsters in the nice part of town. It is the kind of place where people are so fancy they don't even think twice about throwing away valuable goods that a normal person would sell on eBay. However, down this one alley, I see a new dumpster that is smaller than the others and kind of a dark red color. It is not next to the other dumpsters either, just kind of off on its own directly in the middle of the alley. I start rubbing my hands together and oh boy, I just can't wait to dive in. I just have a sixth sense about these things, and my treasure radar was going off the charts. I open the lid slowly, and what do I see inside? A single cereal box and nothing else. I really need to clarify that this was not just an ordinary box of cereal that you would find at your local supermarket. It was clearly not even trash. It was spray painted a metallic silver, and then a stencil had been used to spray paint "Prize Inside" really big across the front. Was this some sort of art project? The box felt heavy, and when I opened the paper flaps, I soon saw why. It was full of little rubber bouncy balls. I tipped the box like I was pouring cereal into a bowl, and hundreds of little red bouncy balls just started ricocheting all over the inside that little red dumpster. Then something else fell out of the box. A small black rectangle. Was this my prize? I brushed some of the balls aside to see what it was. A memory card for the PlayStation 2? That seemed random, but I felt a rush of excitement. What games had been saved 20 years ago and somehow found their way to this bizarre art project in the middle of an alley? I ran home to find out. I fired up an old PS2 I had in the kitchen, replacing my old memory card with the mysterious one I had just found. The familiar music of the PS2 booting up literally warmed the cockles of my heart, and I just sat there in my kitchen smiling at the little box TV I had found next to a dumpster, thinking, they don't make them like that anymore. Then I was able to explore the contents of the memory card. It was completely full, but as I scrolled through, it became clear that they were all for a single game. WWE SmackDown. Here comes the pain. Intrigued, I ordered a copy, disc only, on eBay for $33 plus shipping, which seemed a little steep, but I just had to know what all these files were. I had to wait a week for the game to arrive. During this interim period, I actually walked past the alley where I had found the game. I was going to meet some friends at a restaurant and decided to take a little detour to see if the dumpster art project or whatever it was had been refilled. Of course, it hadn't. In fact, the little red dumpster was gone entirely, like it had never been there at all. I thought that maybe it was a traveling art project, always in a different alleyway or something. I didn't think much of it, and 3 days later I received a sort of scratched up but guaranteed to work copy of WWE SmackDown, Here Comes the Pain. Through the power of the internet, I was able to learn some information about this game. Apparently, it allowed the player to create custom wrestlers and is considered one of the greatest wrestling games ever made. I assumed that the memory card must have been full of these customized wrestlers, and I was looking forward to seeing what wacky creations had found their way onto a memory card in a cereal box in a dumpster. This had to be an artistic project or something, and I was really excited to fully experience it. When I started up the game and opened up the custom characters section of the game, I was shocked and confused. The first character I opened looked sort of like me. It was named Secret Code. It was wearing a green flannel shirt, a shirt I was fond of wearing in the autumnal months, and black shorts, and had my long red hair. The mouth was hanging open, and it looked like it had maybe barfed a black liquid down the chin and onto the shirt. It had numbers tattooed down its legs, which were clearly my social security code. What the hell? Until now I was kind of half guessing that one of my friends had made this, knowing that I would find it in that alleyway, like a really elaborate prank. But did any of my friends know my social security code? How would they have gotten this information? I started to get really scared and looked around my house like someone was watching me. I clicked on the next character. This one was just called 12/12/94, which was also creepy because that is my birthday. The character was tiny, like a newborn baby, but was clearly just a chubby little man who was designed to be 1.5 feet tall. Was this something that was even allowed in the game editing programming? Why would they allow you to make such a small character? Of course, my real concern was that the person or persons who made these characters were aware of my personal information and had clearly intended for me to find this. I went through a bunch of the custom characters. They were all of me at different parts of my life. They told my life story in a very creepy way that also seemed to be making fun of me at times. For example, in my teenage years, I went through what I guess you would call a steampunk phase, and there was a character called Wow Cool Clocks who was just covered in gears and little clocks, and even had my signature purple top hat from that time. Even I had forgotten about that purple top hat with the goggles on it. The list of people who could have access to all this personal knowledge was basically my mom and dad, and there's no way they would have done something so weird and traveled across 4 states to set this whole thing up, because they are old and actually very kind people. This whole thing felt really antagonistic and complicated. I scrolled through so many disturbing versions of myself that I felt dizzy. And then I got to the end of the list. There was a character called DAP Now. DAP are my initials. At this point, I wasn't surprised that the creators of these characters knew my name, because they also knew literally everything else about my life. However, what was truly disturbing about this one was that it was dressed exactly as I was at that moment. A red and white striped shirt, yellow shorts, and red Converse high tops. I did another sweep around the house. For some reason it just felt like I was being watched, even though I had this memory card for like a week, and the data must have been on there the whole time. I returned back to my velvet ottoman in the kitchen and selected the character DAP Now to play in a wrestling match. Before the character made its entrance, a bunch of fireworks went off, but the music changed to the sound of crickets and someone walking on leaves. I had to turn the volume way up to even hear what this entrance theme was. Then DAP Now came out, but was sitting in a small red dumpster that was slowly rolling its way down the ramp. It looked like its neck was broken as well. and the head was kind of dangling backwards and twitching from side to side. It was holding up a poster above its head that read, "It's me," with an arrow pointing down. When the dumpster finally got to the ring, the character did a wild somersault out of the dumpster and landed in the middle of the ring. It stuck its arms out to the sides like a scarecrow and kind of waddled around jerkily. It reminded me of the way they make Bernie's dead body dance in the Weekend at Bernie's films. I was so scared by all this that I turned off the PS2 and threw down the controller. My hands were shaking as I looked through my contacts in my phone for the most likely suspects. After 3 of my friends accused me of making the characters and then making up a weird story about finding a memory card, I just gave up and walked to the supermarket to get some fresh air and beer to calm my nerves. I was in the chips aisle just looking at all the bags of chips, kind of out of it, when I see a guy in a baseball cap looking at me. When I look up, he immediately walks away to the next aisle, but I can hear him talking to someone. I can't quite make out what they're saying at first, but then I distinctly hear 2 words, "Dap now," and then a short pause, and then some other guy says, "Right here?" And then I can hear them whispering or murmuring about something. I made my way to the back of the supermarket, where the raw meat was chilling in the freezers. I angle my way over to the aisle where the men were talking about me and lean my head in to get a good look at them. There was the baseball hat guy and another guy who was wearing a suit, and they are both looking my way like they were expecting me or something, and then they both just take off running toward the front of the store. I am shocked that this is even happening, so it takes me a few moments to realize I should be chasing them, and by the time I get outside the store, all I can see is a white van hauling ass around the corner. They were gone. I walk back into the supermarket and talk to Ponytail Donnie, the guy who owns the store. I ask him if he saw those guys who just ran out, and he says he didn't, but then when I describe them, he says he has seen them before but doesn't know who they are. As I was leaving the store, I hear him say, "Oh yeah, those are the guys who smuggle in their homemade cereal boxes and leave them on the shelves. People see them and think I'm some kind of weirdo trying to sell garbage to people disguised as food. I told them not to come in here anymore. I have been asking everyone in my neighborhood about the cereal boxes that say prize inside for the past week, and now everyone thinks I'm the local nutjob or something. But I'm convinced that Ponytail Donnie was telling the truth and that there are other cereal boxes being left around in random places. If you find one laying around or randomly on a shelf in a supermarket, don't even think about opening it, but contact me through this website immediately." Don't forget to subscribe, and remember, true pastas are the scariest pastas.